Wyoming Territory, 1872. The wind carried the scent of gunpowder and pine through the valley when Kallie Voss buried her husband and realized she was alone again. The sun hung low over the snowy range, casting long golden shadows across the small homestead she and Benjamin had worked so hard to build. The grave beside the barn was fresh, the dirt still raw where she'd laid him to rest after the fever took him in 2 days. She had not cried when he died. She had not screamed. She had just stood there in the doorway, holding her daughter close, watching a man she once loved slip away with nothing more than a wheeze. Now, with both hands on her knees and her back aching from digging the grave herself, Kallie looked toward the house. Her son, Kent, sat on the porch steps, legs swinging, clutching his wooden soldier. Her daughter, Kate, barely 5, leaned against the porch post, thumb in her mouth. Neither spoke. They had learned not to. Kallie took a breath so deep it burned. "We will be fine," she said aloud. "We have to be." But 3 days later, the man who'd sworn to look after them, Benjamin's brother, left without a word. Took the horse, the wagon, and what little silver they had left in the coffee tin under the floorboards. Kallie found a note scrawled on the back of a shipping receipt. "I am not made for this." Those 5 words nearly broke her. The food stores were low. The roof leaked. Winter was coming fast, and she had 2 young mouths to feed. She stood in the middle of the kitchen that night, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tight her knuckles turned white. The children were asleep in the loft, and the silence felt like it might crush her. Every breath was a fight. "I cannot do this," she whispered. "I cannot do this alone." But at sunrise, she was out in the field, checking the fence line with a cracked boot and a rifle slung over her back. She still had the land, and she still had her children. That was the morning he rode in. A single rider, tall in the saddle, dust clinging to his coat, hat shadowing his face. His horse was lathered, hooves pounding the dirt path that led up from the canyon. Kallie froze halfway between the barn and the house, rifle half raised. The man pulled up short and lifted both hands in the air. "I am not looking for trouble," he called. She kept the gun steady. "Then keep riding." "I am looking for the Voss ranch," he said. "Benjamin Voss sent word a month ago, said he needed a hand before winter." Kallie's grip loosened just a little. "Benjamin is dead." The man nodded once. "I heard." He dismounted, slow and careful, and only then did she see the wear on his face. He looked to be in his early 30s, dark hair slicked back from the ride, a short beard lining his jaw. He looked like he had seen too many things and said too little about any of them. "I am Oran Calloway," he said. "Benjamin and I rode in Kansas together. He saved my life once. I owed him." Kallie lowered the rifle. "You are late." "I know." He looked past her to the house, to the porch where Kate now stood, peeking around the corner. Then to Kent, who had come out with a stick in hand, standing guard like a little soldier. Oran's gaze softened. "You got young ones," he said. "Yes, and no one to help." "I do not want your money," he said. "I came to pay a debt. Let me stay." "Let me help." She crossed her arms, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You know how to mend a roof?" "I know how to mend a lot of things." After a long moment, she nodded once and stepped aside. The days that followed were hard but different. Oran worked from sunup to sundown without complaint. He patched the roof, fixed the broken axle on the cart, and chopped enough wood to last through January. He never asked for thanks, never crossed boundaries. He slept in the barn, took meals after the children were fed, and spoke only when spoken to. He was quiet but not cold, strong but gentle. The children began watching him more and more. Kate brought him a wildflower one evening. Kent started following him around the yard like a shadow. One night, after the children were asleep, Kallie found Oran by the fire pit behind the barn, sharpening his knife. She stood beside him in the flickering light. "They are smiling again," she said. "They are good kids," he said. "Strong." "They had to be," she said. "I was not much use to them for a while." He looked up. "You are doing just fine." She wrapped her arms around her middle. "It broke me, Oran. All of it. Losing Benjamin, being left behind, having to be everything at once." He nodded. "I know what that kind of broken feels like." She looked at him then. Really looked. "What did it to you?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "War. My brother never came back. I spent years carrying that weight, thought I could outrun it." He looked at her. "But you cannot outrun pain, you have to build something new," she swallowed. "And if it breaks again," he set the knife down, stood slowly and stepped close. Not too close, but enough. "Then let us build something stronger together." The fire cracked between them, her breath caught in her chest. "You want to stay?" she asked. "I already have." She did not touch him, not yet, but her eyes stayed on his, and for the first time in months something in her chest stopped aching. That night, the wind was quiet, and for the first time in what felt like years, Callie let herself believe something good might still come. By late October, the grass around the creek had turned brittle and pale, and the aspens along the ridge wore their last gold like a dying flame. Frost showed up each morning a little thicker than the day before, and Callie had started waking with her hands curled tight from the cold. The stove kept the worst of it out, but the house had gaps where the wind still found its way in. Oran had begun cutting lengths of wool sheeting to tack over the window frames. He didn't ask, just did it, quiet and sure. Callie noticed the way he moved through the house now, not like a guest, but like someone who understood where things belonged. He kept to the edges, didn't take up space he hadn't earned, but he was present in a way she hadn't realized she'd needed. One evening, after supper, she found him sitting at the table with Kent, showing him how to whittle a whistle from a willow branch. Kent's brow was furrowed deep, tongue caught between his teeth as he copied the slow, careful strokes. "That'll call birds, will it?" Kent asked, voice hushed. "If you do it right," Oran said. "But you got to listen more than you speak. That's how you learn what sounds they like." Callie leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching. She didn't say a word until Kent wandered off to show Kate his finished carving. "You knew your father?" she asked, stepping into the lamplight. Oran nodded. "He was a blacksmith. Honest hands. Didn't have much use for war, but when Missouri went sideways, he sent us off anyhow." "You were young." 17, he said. "Old enough to carry a musket, not old enough to know what it meant." He didn't look at her, just turned the knife slowly in his palm. "I think about him sometimes, when the fire's low, and there's nothing left to do but sit. Think on whether he'd have understood the man I turned out to be." Callie pulled out the chair across from him and sat, laying her hands flat against the scarred wood. "I think about who I used to be," she said, "before all of this, before I had to learn how to bury a man with my own hands, before my son started watching me like he was afraid I might vanish." Oran didn't interrupt. "I used to paint," she added, quiet. "Oils. I'd sit on the back porch with a canvas and let the light tell me what to put down. Haven't touched a brush in years." He looked up at her then, really looked. "You should," he said. "You still got that porch, and the light's still good." She gave a soft laugh, more breath than sound. "There's always something pressing, always another chore." "Then we make time," he said. "You watch the sun in the evenings, I'll take the morning rounds." Callie stared at him, eyes narrowing, not in suspicion but in something closer to disbelief. "You mean that?" "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." She thought then of the way he'd checked the smokehouse that morning, how he'd stacked the kindling to dry near the hearth without being asked, how he'd tied Kate's boots tighter when they slipped from her ankles and she'd started to cry. "You never ask for anything," she said. "Don't need much," he answered. "Just room enough to stand and hands steady enough to work." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. Not a grasp, just a touch, deliberate and still. I don't know how to let someone take up space here without feeling like something might be taken from me. Oran turned his hand over, letting her fingertips rest against his palm. Then let me show you what it's like to have something added instead. The lamp guttered slightly, flame flickering, and Callie felt something loosen inside her chest, not all the way, but enough to breathe a little easier. That night, after the children were asleep, she didn't go to bed right away. She stepped out to the porch and stood there beneath the stars, the hard chill of the air biting at her cheeks. She didn't bring a canvas. She didn't bring anything. Just stood there, letting the night wrap around her, and realized she didn't feel alone anymore. The first snow came down light and slow, settling into the creases of the hills like flour sifted over bread dough. By morning, the garden rose had disappeared beneath a pale blanket, and the sky hung low and pewter-colored. Oran was already outside, boots crunching over the frost, when Callie stepped out with a kettle of hot water for the animal's trough. She handed it over without a word, and he took it, hands brushing briefly. They didn't speak much in the cold, not until work was done and the stove had been fed twice over. That evening, Callie set the children to peeling apples while she kneaded dough with fingers gone stiff from the weather. Oran sat across from her at the work table, mending the harness strap that had cracked during the last haul of firewood. "Your stitching's tight," she said, eyes on the leather. "You learned that from cavalry days." "No," he said, "from my mother." She did harness work for a freight outfit back in Independence. "Taught me early," said boys who couldn't mend their own gear didn't deserve to carry it. Callie smiled without showing teeth. "She sounds like someone I would have liked." She was soft-spoken but firm. The kind of woman who could stop a room with one glance. Callie looked down at the dough, pressing the heel of her palm into it. "I never thought I'd miss being told what to do. But sometimes I wish I'd had someone like that, when things first started falling apart." Oran set the needle down and leaned forward, forearms braced on the table. "What did your mother teach you?" Callie's hand stilled. "To keep my head down and not ask for more than was offered. She said men had limits, and we were better off staying within them." He didn't answer right away. Just let the silence stretch until the fire shifted in the hearth. "That's not what I see when I look at you," he said. She met his eyes across the table. "What do you see?" A woman who didn't wait for help to come. One who stood her ground with a rifle when a stranger rode in. She looked away, brushing flour from her knuckles. "You've helped more than you know. I just cleared space around what you'd already built." The children giggled then, something about Kate's apple peel coming off in one long coil. Callie turned toward them, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. When she looked back, Oran was watching her the way a man watches something he's not sure he deserves to hold. Later that night, after the children were tucked in with quilts and warm stones at their feet, she found him outside again, this time near the edge of the pasture. A pair of lanterns hung from fence posts, casting a soft yellow glow across the snow. "You always walk the fence line after dark?" she asked, stepping up beside him. "Old habit," he said. "Trouble tends to come when you least expect it." She folded her arms, the wool of her shawl drawn tight. "You expecting something?" "No, but I like knowing what's mine is safe." She looked at him then, long and steady. "Is this yours now?" He didn't flinch. "I think it could be, if you want it that way." The wind carried a hush through the grass, brittle and dry beneath the snow. "I've spent a long time not trusting what I want," she said. "It felt safer to want nothing." Oran turned toward her, his voice low but certain. "You deserve more than safe." She didn't answer with words. She stepped closer and he reached out, slow and sure, letting his hand rest against her waist. Not pulling, just anchoring. Her forehead came to rest against his chest, and he stood still, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and snow in her hair. "I don't know where this road goes," she whispered. "We'll walk it together," he said. "As far as it leads." And for once she believed it. By the third week of snow, the barn roof groaned under the weight, and the wind pressed against the house like it meant to test the seams of every plank. Callie rolled batting into the cracks behind the stone hearth, while Oran stitched a patch onto Kent's coat sleeve by lantern light. The boy stood still as a fence post, watching Oran's needle as if it might teach him something he hadn't yet learned. Callie glanced up. "That thread'll hold through spring." Oran didn't look away from the coat. "If it doesn't, I'll make it right." She returned to her task, fingers red from the wool. The air inside the cabin held a brittle edge, the kind that crept into joints no matter how close one sat to the fire. Kate had curled herself into a quilt by the stove earlier and fallen asleep with her cheek against the braided rug. "Benjamin used to grumble through every winter," Callie said. "Said the freeze made his knees feel twice their age." Oran paused, nodding once. "Hard seasons leave their mark." She sat back on her heels, brushing dust from her palms. "You ever spend a winter this far north?" "Only once," he said. "In the Bighorns. Slept in canvas tents and kept the fire buried in the snow to keep it from showing smoke." She studied him for a long moment. "Were you running from something?" He shook his head. "I was chasing peace." The room was quiet save for the steady tick of the mantel clock. Kent was done now, tugging his coat back on, and slipped outside to check on the dog, boots crunching over the crusted snow. Callie folded her hands in her lap. "You strike me as a man who doesn't say more than he means to." "I've learned that silence can carry just as much weight as words." She tilted her head. "So why stay here where the wind never stops and the work never lets up?" He set the needle down, the thread trimmed clean. "Because I'd rather build something honest than chase after comfort." When she didn't answer, he added, "And not just with my hands, Callie." She met his gaze. There was no uncertainty in it. "I'm not ready to give everything," she said, "but I don't want to keep standing still." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, voice low. "Then let's take one step." She rose, crossed the room, and reached for the edge of the quilt piled on the bench beside him. She sat, close enough that their shoulders touched. She didn't look at him, just watched the fire flicker along the blackened bricks. "You said once you owed Benjamin," she murmured, "but I think you've paid that debt 10 times over." Oran's voice was quiet but certain. "Then let me stay for my own reasons." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint creak of the barn door settling. Callie let her head rest gently against his shoulder, and they sat like that, two people not asking for more than the moment allowed, but no longer holding themselves apart from it either. Later, when she looked out the window, the snow had stopped falling. The stars had returned, sharp and clear above the frozen fields, and for the first time in a long while the dark no longer felt like something to endure. The thaw came slow. By late March, the snow had receded into the hollows, and the creek behind the pasture thinned to a steady trickle again. The ground turned to mud, thick and stubborn beneath their boots, and the sky stayed gray more often than not. But the air had lost its bite, and the scent of earth began to rise: wet soil, old leaves, something green trying to push through. Callie stood at the edge of the field behind the barn, a wedge of seed potatoes in her palm, and watched Oran dig the first furrow. His coat hung from a fence post, arms limp in the wind, and his sleeves were rolled to the elbow. His forearms were marked with old scars, thin and pale, like someone had taken a blade to him long ago and left behind a story he didn't speak of. She stepped into the row beside him, dropping a wedge into the soil. "When I was a girl," she said, I used to think spring was proof that God hadn't forgotten us." Oran leaned on the shovel, breathing deep. "And now," she pressed her fingers into the dirt, "now I think maybe it's just the land remembering how to keep going." He nodded, quiet, and sank the blade again. By the time the first shoots pushed through, the roof patch held firm through a week of rain, and the hens were laying regular again. Kent had taken to building traps for rabbits, and Kate spent her mornings chasing the barn cats with a stick she called her wand. Kallie found herself humming while she swept. She didn't notice it at first, just a tune, faint and without words, slipping into the corners of her day like sunlight through chinked logs. She caught Oran listening once, a half-smile tugging at his mouth, not quite amusement, not quite wonder. "You always hum when you're working?" he asked. "Only when the world feels steady," she said. He reached out then, brushing a curl from her cheek with the back of his fingers. The touch was light, reverent almost, and she closed her eyes just long enough to feel it settle somewhere deep. "I want to ask something of you," he said, voice low. She opened her eyes. "But not if it puts weight where you're not ready to carry it." She nodded once. "Go on." "I want to build something with you, not just a roof or a fence, a life. A place where you can hum without even thinking about it." She stepped in close, her fingers finding the calloused edge of his hand. "I've already started," she said. "I just didn't know what to call it." That night, they put the children to bed early and sat by the fire with their knees touching. Oran reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a thin band of braided silver wire. Not polished, not store-bought, just simple, shaped by hand. "I made this," he said, "from the scraps of a bit I found rusting behind the shed. Figured if iron can be softened again, bent to a new shape, maybe so can we." She looked at the ring, then at him, and nodded without hesitation. They married under the cottonwood beside the creek. Just the four of them there, Kent holding a string of wildflowers, Kate clutching her mother's hand. Oran said the vows slow, each word steady, like he was laying stones for a foundation. Callie's voice didn't tremble. They spent the rest of the day sitting on the porch, passing a tin plate of honey biscuits and dried apples back and forth, watching the wind comb through the grass. That summer, the fields yielded more than she expected. The children grew brown from sun and full from laughter. Oran carved a cradle from pine, just in case, though Kallie hadn't said anything yet. She only smiled when she saw it, ran her hand over the smooth curve of the rail. "I reckon we'll need it eventually," she said. Oran pressed a kiss to her temple. "We've got time." The house stayed warm through the following winter. The chimney held, the pantry stayed full. Kallie picked up a brush again, not for sale, not for show, just to remember the way colors met on canvas. Oran built her a bench beneath the kitchen window, where the light came in long and golden in the afternoons. They never spoke of the years before. Not because they were forgotten, but because they no longer needed to be carried alone. In the quiet moments, her hand would find his, or his would rest at the small of her back, and that was enough. They did not chase happiness. They built it, slow and sturdy, with weathered hands and matching hearts, and when the time came, they grew old beneath that roof, two people who had learned how to stay together. Always.